up to you. My name is Eddie Edwards. I am the Assistant Commissioner of the Department of Safety. I want to thank all of you for being here today. This is our second Combating Hate Crime Seminar. And we're thrilled that you're here to learn more about it. And I can tell you up front that New Hampshire will not tolerate hate crime in this state. Will not tolerate it. So what you have, and what I think is, I'm very proud of our state, is that in a state like this, we get to know all sorts of people. Today we have the Attorney General here, we have the Mayor here, and I'm going to introduce those folks in a moment to you. But I want to introduce the Planning Committee to you who sets this up, the first two up. So if I get those Planning Committee members to stand and introduce themselves, just very briefly. Don't be shy, Gil?
Hi.
Ani? Okay. Just tell me your name. Okay. What do you do, even?
I'm an immigrant rights advocate.
Okay.
I'm Brandon Baldwin. I'm with the U.S. Department of Justice. I'm a conciliation specialist with CRS, Community Relations Service. More on that later.
Michelle Holt-Shannon, New Hampshire Listens, 828.
Sean Locke, I'm the Senior Assistant Attorney General with the New Hampshire Attorney General.
I'm Malachi, Director of the Human Rights Commission, and we enforce the laws against discrimination.
Chris.
Chris?
Hi, Chris Wellington, New Hampshire Immigrants' Rights Network.
Good morning, Tyler Dumont. I'm the Communications Administrator with the New Hampshire Department of Safety.
Before I introduce the first speaker, I want to tell you also that, you know, we're not perfect here in New Hampshire. We're not. Contrary to popular belief. But there's a lot of work to be done. But I do think we can serve as a model for the rest of the country. I do. Because this forum will take place, the first one was in Concord, second Keene, we're going to go to the northern part of our state, then the seacoast, and then we're going to do a statewide forum with everyone who participated before. So again, thank you for being here. And I want to introduce Mayor Jay Kahn to come up and say a few words and why he supports this type of initiative. Mayor?
All right, the classroom boys, huh? Well, this is great to kick this off in Keene. I appreciate that, Eddie. And the Attorney General's staff is here, and thank you, John, for hosting these and spreading them around the state. In disclosure, I need to say tonight there is a city council meeting. We do our morning briefings before the meeting at 10 o'clock. I'll be done by then. While I was a state senator, I did that for 6 years before I decided that local government was going to be a better fit for me. I served as a state senator on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And one of the things that we accomplished during those 6 years was to amend the state's statutes, RSA 354A6. It's often the basis, right, for defining what anti-discrimination or what a discrimination act is in the state. It's within the Employment Act and section of the state statutes. And what I felt really proud of being part of is adding a gender identity to the state's discrimination definitions. And we did by adding, in addition, no person shall be denied the benefits of the rights afforded in this section on account of a person's sexual orientation. You could probably name the other 10 areas that were included prior to 2001 when this was done. I'm sorry, 2021. But they include age, sex, gender, race, creed, color, marital status, physical or mental disability, and national origin, and that any discrimination shall be declared a violation of those persons' civil rights. That's a powerful statement, and it's one that the state hangs on. Simultaneous to amending the Labor Employment Act, we also amended the education statutes to make sure that, again, sexual orientation was included among the other forms of discrimination that could be felt by others in our state. So in my reflection about today, I decided that maybe I had something to do with this idea, but maybe not. It was a year ago that I reached out to Attorney General John Formella and said, John, you're really doing some good stuff around the state. You're pursuing hate crimes that have occurred elsewhere in New Hampshire. And I'd like if you could come to Keene and help us organize a forum. John said, I'd like to do that, but I can't. I have to do a National Attorney General's meeting. But he recommended to me Sean Locke. And what I appreciated in that recommendation is that Sean, as the director of the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office, had appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee a number of times. And I began to acknowledge this fellow really is passionate about his work. And what we could see at that time is that there were incidents occurring primarily in Portsmouth. And you may recall the tagging incidents that occurred in Portsmouth and the swastikas that appeared above the roadway on Route 16 heading up to Rochester, and that were allegedly put there by NSC 131, an acknowledged anti-Semitic neo-Nazi group, mostly organized in Massachusetts, but also having a presence in New Hampshire. But the way in which the Attorney General's office pursued those incidents, because they crossed state lines and they might have been sloughed off maybe someplace else, really demonstrated, no, this is a serious act, and we're going to take this seriously, and it's the only way to prevent it, right? It's and so I really admired that. So what we did a year ago is that Sean and his partner at the state level in investigating when there is discrimination in the workplace, Ani Malachi, were two people that we brought to join Rob Millay and our school superintendent locally, and Peggy Shukar of the Anti-Defamation League of New England to have that conversation. And while we think that it's easy to put these acts out of our consciousness and say, it doesn't really happen here, but actually the Sentinel did a pretty good job last night of reminding us, yeah, it does happen locally. If you weren't that other, that person who was, or group, a member of that group that was offended, it's kind of easy to slough it off and not acknowledge it. But crime, in my mind, as I think back to 2017 and the Charlottesville riots, the conflict that took place in Charlottesville, West Virginia, and one person from Keene, Christopher Cantwell, was a prime motivator of the riots, a planner and a person who lived here in Keene at the time that those incidents took place. That was serious, and fortunately, federal prosecutors did prosecute it as a hate crime, and he's now serving time. In response to that, just to say that our community is a pretty alert community, and at that point in time, we were very keyed on that a member of our community was engaged in inciting those acts. And you may recall that there was a vigil on Central Square and through downtown where 400 people participated in that event. And that Mayor Lane, mayor at that time, addressed the crowd and he said, "I'm appalled by racism, bigotry, violence, and white supremacy and anti-Semitism. Today we show our unity against that hatred and bigotry that we see in our community and around the world." But I think our community, and I think what came from our 2023 forum, is we are in a fairly good community where we want to respect others, all of our members of our community, that we want them to feel included, we want people to be, to feel belonged and members of our community. And that by and large, people walked away from that forum thinking, well, we've been spared violent, racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic acts locally. But again, that Sentinel article last night reminded us that just last year, the Westmoreland Church was tagged with anti-Semitic and racist graffiti. That at Keene High School, we have heard of acts of racist and homophobic and anti-Semitic tagging that has taken place in the school. We've heard of that taking place at Keene State College at different points in time in the past 10 years. And I think what's frustrating in that is that we just don't see the transparency to it, because the schools and the college usually do internal work, internal investigations of these acts. There's not a judicial proceeding, there's not clear follow-up, and so we really don't know the extent to which those acts occur, what the origins are, how deeply rooted they are in our community. And I'm glad to see the principal of Keene High School and the Associate Vice President of Keene State both here today, because I think this is an opportunity to give us some of that sense of, and what are those acts? And is this something that is more pervasive in our community, and that we should be more proactive in trying to understand it and trying to be more proactive in making sure that they don't happen in the future. What I'm finding in municipal government is that we get things going not because things pass by a majority of 51%, but because there is a sense of collective action. And I get a sense that people here are interested in trying to understand what can be in Keene and in western New Hampshire that can be that collective action that we take together. what is it that we can do to make our community more inclusive and to provide a sense of belonging to minority groups who might be offended by hateful acts. So we have in the city of Keene, we have a human rights committee, and I'm glad to see Alyssa Bender here, who helps staff that committee. And then we have the Monadnock Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee, which Kat Workman, a city councilor and chair of that committee, I'm sure that they're going to be very interested in the discussion today and the outcomes, the recommendations. But for me, with the questions I hope that I'll hear back about is how can we be more transparent about the hateful acts that take place in our community? How can we be more prepared to respond and support those who are affected by hateful acts and break through that feeling of being the other in our community as opposed to being full members of our community? And can we be proactive, helping those often targeted by hateful acts feel that they belong and are supported by our community? If you'll tackle those questions, I assure you that I will be an advocate to try to keep those questions present in the discussions that we have in the city. And I want to also pledge that if you have felt that you are a victim, if you know of those who feel that they have been victimized by hateful acts, that I want to know about them. I want our city to be transparent about those acts, and I want us to be responsive and inclusive to those who in our community have felt abridged and violated by hateful acts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is our keynote speaker, and I can't say enough about the Attorney General. John Pamela has been at the tip of the spear in making sure that these cases are handled appropriately, speaking out about those, and I don't think you get that in other parts of the country. I really don't. Like most of you, I've spoken to people all over this country, and very rarely do you have the Attorney General who is leading the charge and standing tall and not shying away and backing away from this conversation. So I'm very proud of our Attorney General. I think he is setting a benchmark that other Attorney Generals around the country can follow. And with that, Attorney General John Pamela.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. Very kind. Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here. I just want to start by thanking you all for being here and participating in the conversation. I think these conversations are really important. You know, the reason we're here starts from the principle that New Hampshire is a welcoming place where the live free or die. And that means a lot of different things, but it certainly means, first and foremost, that there's no place for hate or discrimination in New Hampshire. We want New Hampshire to be a place where everyone feels welcome, people of all backgrounds feel welcome, no matter where you come from, no matter how you choose to live your life, no matter how you identify, really no matter who you are, you feel that this is a welcoming place where you have the opportunity to live your life free from hate and discrimination, pursue your dreams, pursue your passions, and build the life you want to build for yourself, but also your family and for your community, for your friends, for those you care about. So it's just such an important principle that being the live free or die state is built upon. New Hampshire has a great history on these issues, too, and Mayor Khan spoke a little bit about it, but New Hampshire really does have a great history. We have one of the oldest state civil rights acts in the country. We were one of the first states in the country to legalize same-sex marriage by statute, not by court decision. We are one of still less than the majority of states that have passed an anti-discrimination statute that protects transgender people. We have a great history. We really have led the way in so many areas when it comes to building a state that is welcoming, inclusive, and open. Even in the last few years, we've seen great bipartisan work in this area. But we have challenges too. And I was just talking to, I just met Tom Julius this morning. We were talking about this, but we are confronting our own challenges in this area today. And I think about this all the time, and I've thought about it a lot more lately. History is not linear, right? So, you know, we tend to think of things, and Tom and I were just talking things like the KKK, you know, the civil rights movement. We tend to think of those things as having happened, you know, back at this point in time, and think of problems that occurred back then as having been addressed and resolved, and now we're here and we've sort of moved on from those problems. And you know, the more you read about history, the more you look at the fact that you realize history isn't linear. Stuff that happened 50, 60 years ago, it gets addressed then. If we're not diligent and vigilant, and if we don't work hard among every successive generation to continue to address things like hate and discrimination, it pops up. Because every generation brings a whole new set of people. And every generation has its own obligation to confront really the fundamental problems that society confronts. And I think we're seeing that today in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is changing. I talk about this a lot when we have these forums. New Hampshire's changing in a lot of really cool and exciting ways. When I was a kid, I moved to New Hampshire when I was a kid, but when I was a kid and moved here from Jacksonville, Florida, I was born in Rochester, Minnesota, went to Jacksonville, Florida, went to public schools there for a few years. When I moved here back in the late 1990s, New Hampshire was probably 97, 98% white. That's changed a lot. New Hampshire's getting a lot more diverse. New Hampshire's less than 90% white now. I think our school population in places like Manchester and Nashua is so much more diverse now. Every part of the state is getting more diverse, and it enriches the fabric of New Hampshire. It enriches our state. It brings a new vibrancy to our culture. It gives people the experience of getting to meet people from different backgrounds and really understand different perspectives. I think it's an amazing thing for the state. But with a transformation like that also can come tension and can bring both the need but also opportunity to confront issues that maybe we haven't confronted before. And I wouldn't say that the New Hampshire changing is the only reason we're seeing some of the recent activity we've seen, but I think it's probably one. We've seen certain dialogue at the national level that I think contributes to it. But you put all that together and other factors, and there's no question that that has led to a rise in hateful acts in New Hampshire. We see it in the numbers. Our Civil Rights Unit was just established in 2017. That's one area in which I will say I think we were behind the curve in New Hampshire. We should have established a Civil Rights Unit long before that, but we established a Civil Rights Unit in 2017. And in its first year in existence, it saw 40, I think a little over 40 complaints, hateful acts. Last year, there were over 200, and we're on pace to exceed that number this year. Still early, but we're on pace to exceed that number. So it's borne out of the numbers. We're seeing increased activity, increased hateful acts. We're also seeing more organized hateful activity in New Hampshire. So we have challenges to confront, just like any generation has, and I think this will be an ongoing challenge that we confront as people, especially in this country, in the United States, which is really, for the first time, becoming that true melting pot. We've always been a melting pot, but we're just becoming more and more diverse, more rich, not in money, but rich in culture and in privacy. So that's the challenge we're facing, and that's why I think we're all here. So the question is, what do we do? What can we do? And there's a number of different things, but there's a couple I just want to talk about as we kick off. And as Attorney General, I serve as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer. And so I think one obligation we have is just generally, as public officials, to speak out about these issues. I think all of us have an obligation to speak out about these issues, but especially those of us in state government who are in a public position where people will listen to us, we have an obligation to speak out and prioritize combating hate as something that's important, so that people see that and those who may be experiencing these issues feel that people are paying attention. So we've been trying to do that at the Attorney General's office. I don't claim anything we do is perfect, and I never think we're doing everything we can do. There's always more we can do. But we're prioritizing this. We're pursuing hate groups. Mayor Khan spoke about some of the actions before. We are trying to help organize these forums and these conversations around the state. Recently, we took the step of expanding our civil rights unit. The chief of our civil rights unit, Sean Locke, is here. He's done some amazing work in the last few years, and we've taken that unit from 1 person to 4 people. I want to take a minute to introduce a couple other members of our team. Peter Kenner, who's the new attorney in our civil rights unit, is here. Lauren Katz, she's not brand new, but she's fairly new to the civil rights unit. She's here, and we'll have a new investigator starting in a number of months. So we are expanding the civil rights unit in the Attorney General's office. The purpose of that unit is not only to bring civil rights actions to pursue hate groups or others who might commit acts of hate or violations of the Civil Rights Act. It's also to foster conversations like this. So I'm very excited about the fact that we're building, really for the first time, we're truly building the necessary infrastructure at the Attorney General's office to make this a priority. So that's what we can do as state officials. In law enforcement generally, we sent out new protocols a few years ago to police departments around the state to help us investigate hate crimes when they happen, Civil Rights Act violations, or any other incident that might be considered an act of hate that may not rise ultimately to a violation of the law, but at least warrants some investigation. We've worked with police departments around the state. I know we've got folks from the state police here, we've got the chief of the police in Keene here. Law enforcement is really starting to buy in, and I think that's a big step we can take to address the challenges that I was talking about. The other really important step, and it might be more important, frankly, is fostering community conversations. So both conversations between law enforcement and state and local officials and the community, hearing what the community is experiencing. It's one of the things I've found since I've been in state government the last 7.5 years in Concord is that you can really find yourself, if you're a public official, in a hub, right? You think you know what's going on out there, you think you have a sense of what you need to be focusing on, but you can really end up in a puzzle. So it's so important. It's why we come to these types of forums for public officials to get out into the community, to foster those conversations between the community and public officials, but also to foster conversations between different communities in the state, right? Between different people. Every person really comes with a unique background that's frankly just unique to them. But we tend to these days talk about communities and groups and think of them in silos and label them. But the reality is we're all just people. And when you foster conversations among people and you come to forums like this, that's really, I think, when real change can happen. That's really the way you change hearts and minds. People think differently about someone of a certain background if they have a chance to meet them and talk to them. And the evidence of that has been apparent in almost any achievement in the area of civil rights and combating hate and discrimination. It's those conversations that really matter. So as we kick off this forum, I would just encourage you, not only today, but as you go forward and think about how we make a difference in this area, really focus on what you can do to foster conversations. And if, I don't know if anyone here has ever read the book, I think it's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the rules in there, the habits that really sticks with me that I think is so important in this area is seek first to be seek first to understand, then to be understood. Right. And frankly, none of us are perfect. I certainly am not. But that, in this area of combating hate and discrimination and making progress in this area, I think that is so important. You first have to understand where someone's coming from. And I don't just mean understand where someone from a different background is coming from. You know, someone who is an immigrant, where they're coming from, someone who's Jewish, where they're coming from, someone who's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, where they're coming from. I also mean understand where someone who may seem like they're somewhat small-minded or closed-minded or even bigoted. Understand where they're coming from and why they think that and feel that. Nobody's born, I think, with hate inside them. Nobody is born like that. So it's really important to try to understand where someone like that is coming from. And then once you understand it, try to have those conversations with them to break. That's so and I think it's especially important as we kick off the forum like this, because we have a really important role in law enforcement and as government officials to speak out about hate and discrimination, to do what we can to pursue hate groups. But we can't, on our own, foster community conversations that starts with all of us. And I think at the end of the day, that's really how we're going to make progress. The last thing I'll leave you with is this. If your goal is perfection, and if your goal is changing things overnight, I've heard Ava speak about this at the last forum, you're just asking to be disappointed and you're asking to burn out and give up. You know, I think of progress on any issue, but especially in an issue like this, our goal is to have it look kind of like the stock market, right? You know, trending up, but like that. You know, like steps forward, steps back, always trending up and always moving forward, but it doesn't mean we're not going to have setbacks. And so that is just the last message I would leave you with. This is a constant and continuing obligation for all generations to make progress in these areas. We are going to see setbacks, and it's never going to be perfect. But if you view this as a constant striving to be better, and if you view progress as a victory and not perfection, then I think we can continue to make progress and continue to make this a state where everyone truly feels welcome and everyone feels free to live their life the way they pursue their passions and frankly just be happy for the fairly limited amount of time that we are here in the context of time. So thank you again for being here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I will be here the whole time, so if anybody has questions about what we're doing at the AG's office or wants to talk more about any of those issues, I'll be around. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Edwards to continue the program. So thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Famella. Our next presenter is really going to get into the law and tell you what hate crime is. Some of you may be wondering what hate crime is and why is this a hate crime or why is that a hate crime, which is very important. That's one of the things we want to make sure people were very familiar with, understanding the law. So Sean Locke has been that advocate around the state in terms of educating people and being very involved. You may have seen him on Channel 9 repeatedly. He's doing a fantastic job. Attorney Sean Locke.
My notes in it. So, welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. I believe Mayor Khan called it the classroom voice. I'm going to use what I call my courtroom voice so you all can hear me. Folks in the back, if you cannot hear me, please wave at me, throw something at me, let me know, because I want to make sure I'm speaking loud enough for everyone to hear and understand what I'm saying. I'll start with just a brief introduction of myself. So, As you've heard, my name is Sean Locke. I'm a Senior Assistant Attorney General at the New Hampshire Attorney General's Office, and I direct the Civil Rights Unit there. I've done that for 4.5 years now. Prior to that, I was a prosecutor at the New Hampshire Attorney General's Office, but I began my career both as a law student and after law school as a disability rights attorney and a disability rights advocate. That's what brought me into kind of, among many other personal factors, brought me into kind of this perspective of combating discrimination and combating hate. Kind of a little personal background here, just to humanize myself for everyone, is, one of my earliest memories growing up, I grew up here in New Hampshire. I was born in the late 80s, but one of my earliest memories was my mother, her sister, both of whom used wheelchairs. They left to go to DC to demonstrate in support of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they marched in DC to support that, and in that demonstration, I don't think they participated in this, but others did. People who used wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, they threw themselves out of their chairs, they threw their crutches down, and pulled themselves up physically up the steps of the United States Capitol to show the harm that inaccessibility causes. And I think that goes to the point that the Attorney General was making towards the end, in that there may be circumstances where you face adversity when you are confronting hate and you are trying to kind of push back and create a more equal and just society. We've seen that in the 1960s. To give you the example of the disabilities rights movement, you can look at the LGBTQ+ movement for equality, the pushback after Massachusetts legalized same-sex marriage that led to multiple states passing constitutional amendments banning same-sex marriage. And that fight that lasted over a decade before the United States Supreme Court struck those types of laws and amendments down to legalize it across the country. You may face adversity when you combat hate and you confront hate. It doesn't mean that the fight isn't worth engaging in. It may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but over the course of history, we are moving towards a better society. Now, with that in mind, I probably should have ended with that as the feel-good note, but I find something better to end with.
I'll take it.
But I have 4 goals here in kind of this section. The first is to give you, it's a crash course, this isn't even a 101, it's kind of a fire hose. But the goal is to get a better understanding of what makes something a hate crime, what makes something a Civil Rights Act violation, or what might be a hate incident. To better understand the importance of reporting things that may seem even like minor or trivial hate incidents. Not that any of those are minor or trivial to those affected, but you think of murder versus someone maybe calling me an offensive comment. That's what I'm talking about when I say that. Better understand what happens when you make those reports to law enforcement or to the Attorney General's office or the federal government, and to better understand what are the limitations of a legal response and how can the community also be a vehicle through which we can confront and combat hate, and sometimes even a more effective and powerful vehicle than a legal response. Hopefully leave some time for questions. I appreciate the forbearance as we've been dealing with the microphone system here earlier, so we're a little behind. But I'll start here with what is a hate crime? And I'm obviously going to be speaking at you. I see several people pick them up. There are brochures that cover a lot of this information that we have put together at the registration table, so you can have something to take home with you as you think about this, or see it in your communities or in your lives. But in New Hampshire, any crime can become a hate crime if there's evidence that the suspect who committed or the actor was substantially motivated by hostility towards the victim's, what I call protected characteristics. So this includes race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, and several other categories. Now what does that mean? Okay, that's great. What does it mean? So use an example. 2 women are walking down the street together. A man confronts them, makes a series of homophobic comments, and punches one of the women before running away. This is likely a hate crime. This is an example of a hate crime. You have the crime that occurred, what in law enforcement we call simple assault. So when he punched that woman, he assaulted her. It was a simple assault because it was an unprivileged, intentional but unprivileged physical contact. So we touched her without her permission. You have evidence of hate motivation. The making of homophobic comments at these 2 women. Because of that man's perception of their sexual orientation. And the key element in what makes that hate motivation is not whether or not these women were a couple, whether or not they were lesbians or bisexual or anything like that. What matters is what that person intended when he did his act. And so the evidence there of the comments he made shows he perceived them to be a same-sex couple or perceived them to be lesbians. And that's what led to the unprovoked assault. So that's what makes it a hate crime. Another example that comes up, this is actually, it's a New Hampshire Supreme Court case that dealt with hate crimes. This was the victim here was, she worked in a repair shop, essentially, an auto mechanic shop. Individual comes in trying to get his car serviced. He has a bunch of kind of neo-Nazi paraphernalia, swastikas, tattoos, things like that on him. Her family died as members of the French Resistance during World War II. She told this man he needed to leave. They were not going to serve him at this business because he's a Nazi. He thought that meant she's Jewish, and that's why she was kicking him out. So he proceeds to make a series of anti-Semitic comments, threatens to get his gun and come back and shoot her. He's charged with a hate crime for criminally threatening her because of his perception that she is Jewish. So I use those two examples to illustrate it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who's the victim of a hate crime necessarily has the protected characteristic that's being targeted. It may be that someone believes they do. Certainly if they have that characteristic and that's why they're being targeted, that's another reason that it could be a hate crime. And my example, I talked about threatening, I talked about assault, but it's any crime. So it could be property damage, it could be trespass, it could be harassment. That could be the basis of a hate crime. If it's in the New Hampshire Criminal Code and it's motivated by hate, it can become a hate crime. Well, why? Why do people commit hate crimes, and what makes them unique? Why do we hold them out as a separate type of offense? Hate crimes are message crimes. Plain and simple. Most crimes, you have a victim, most of the time if you're the victim of a crime, you know the person who is the perpetrator. Not always, but many times you do. The data just shows that. But hate crimes, you may not know the perpetrator, and they're meant to send a message not only to the victim of the hate crime, but the entire community of people who live, look, worship, love like that person. And that message is often something along the lines of, you are unsafe. You are not welcome here. You should hide. You should diminish yourself. You shouldn't celebrate who you are because we don't want you here. That's what a hate crime is trying to tell people. And that's what makes these so unique, and that's what leads to them being held out as a separate type of offense, as an offense where people will face enhanced criminal penalty, because the effect, the impact of a hate crime reverberates beyond the incident itself to affect entire communities. So what does charging someone with a hate crime do? A lot of times people are like, well, why isn't someone being charged with a hate crime? Or I want someone charged with a hate crime. What does that mean? What does that practically do? It has several effects. So first, and probably most importantly, and why people usually want to see hate crime charges, is it increases the penalties that a person might face for their criminal act. So in New Hampshire, we have 3 types of criminal offenses: felonies, misdemeanors, and violations. A violation can't be charged as a hate crime, but a misdemeanor can. A misdemeanor normally, a person could face up to a year of incarceration and fines. If it's enhanced to be a hate crime, they face up to 2 to 5 years of incarceration, and still they'll face fines. For felonies, depending on if it's an A or a B felony, a person may face 3.5 to 7 years, or 7.5 to 15 years of incarceration. If it's a hate crime enhanced penalty, it's 10 to 30 years of incarceration that they might face. So there are significant increases in the penalties. I often say when we're talking about, even with the original offense as a misdemeanor, changing from 12 months to 2 to 5 years, or up to 12 months to 2 to 5 years, a B felony is 3.5 to 7. You've effectively turned that misdemeanor into a felony. It also practically will require the case to be tried in the county superior court. So it's not going to be tried in a circuit court where there are more of those around the country that are a little closer to the community. It's tried at the county level. And it's going to be tried by the county attorney's office. And it also ensures that the defendant has a right to a jury trial from the beginning. From the prosecutor's side, the most important thing that it does is it adds an element that the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to prove that the person was motivated by hate when they committed the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. That's hard. That is a very unique aspect. Motive is always interesting when you're talking about a crime. Why did this person do this? It helps kind of inform maybe whether they did it or not. But it's not usually something you have to prove a crime occurred. For a hate crime, you have to prove motive. You have to show what that person was thinking when they committed their crime. And you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Fortunately, there are a lot of indicators that like law enforcement and prosecutors can point to show whether or not something was hate motivated. But there's a big gulf that sometimes exists between a potential hate crime and actually being able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But it's important to know that even if a crime isn't charged as a hate crime, the state can still provide evidence of the potential hate motivation or what might have kind of informed the crime when they're asking the judge to impose a sentence. You may not get the enhanced penalties, but you still might get a more serious consequence for that person, even if it isn't charged as a hate crime. So that's hate crimes. The second thing here we have in New Hampshire is a statute called the Civil Rights Act, or a law called the Civil Rights Act. It's a law I primarily work with. As I talk about it, you'll see why it overlaps a lot with hate crimes, but it is not a criminal statute itself. So people don't go to jail for committing a Civil Rights Act violation, at least not at first. But it allows the Attorney General to file a lawsuit against someone who either uses physical force, violence, property damage, trespass, or threatens to do any of those things, and that unlawful act, whatever it may be, was motivated by animus towards a person or group's protected characteristics, and that the unlawful act was designed to actually interfere with or attempted to interfere with a person or group's lawful activities. So in the example I gave of that assault, motivated by sexual orientation, it was not only a hate crime, but it was also a Civil Rights Act violation, and we can bring both of those cases. So the prosecutor can charge the person with a crime, and the Attorney General's office can go and file a Civil Rights Act lawsuit against that person. Nothing prevents us from doing both. Now sometimes there may be circumstances where a Civil Rights Act violation has occurred, but a hate crime hasn't. Maybe because the language or what makes something a Civil Rights Act violation encompasses more than what might be criminal conduct. And there may be circumstances where a crime has occurred, but because it didn't involve a threat or use of force or property damage, it may not be able to be a Civil Rights Act violation. Those things do happen sometimes. But when thinking about the difference between a criminal charge and a Civil Rights Act violation, I think there's this. The criminal charge is designed to kind of redress the harm that that person caused, maybe punish them for the harm that they caused. The Civil Rights Act enforcement action looks forward. It's designed to protect the victim, protect the community, and protect the public from future hate-motivated conduct. Because what happens when we file one is we ask the court to restrain that person from having contact with the victim and anything else that might prevent them from being able to commit future hate-motivated acts. So one thing we usually ask for is that they can't commit future hate-motivated acts without more significant consequences. But it may also mean that we ask for the court to order them to undergo counseling, mental health counseling, behavioral counseling, whatever, anger management, whatever it is that may have motivated or prompted them to engage in the act. We ask for them to complete community service so they can learn, kind of better understand, give back to their community, but also better understand how their community lives. Particularly when we're dealing with younger people, we might ask for the court to order some sort of reflective or restorative justice work, because sometimes, especially with younger people, there may not be appreciation for the harm that they have caused when they engage in that hate-motivated conduct, and the opportunity to learn, grow, and develop so they can go forward into the world without kind of committing future acts of hate is better. Because sometimes there are plenty of people, as we talked about, with communities online who will foster someone's grievance that they feel like they're being mistreated because of something they've done, and that can further someone down the path of radicalization. And we don't necessarily want our work to do that. And there are plenty of other options. They're unique to each case that we could ask the court to do. Other advantages of doing it, why we bring them, the cases move faster. They have a reduced threshold of proof, so instead of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, we have to provide proof by clear and convincing evidence. Basically meaning it's highly probable. It's more like it's highly probable that this was a hate-motivated act. It also means that, these are tried in front of a judge. So it's not, there isn't a jury trial, there's only a trial in front of a judge. So there may be other reasons beyond just whether or not it's a hate crime versus a Civil Rights Act violation that we file a Civil Rights Act case, but a prosecutor may not file a hate crime charge. So that's Civil Rights Act violations. Now let's talk about probably the most difficult topic here, what are hate incidents? And so a hate incident, basically anything that isn't a hate crime or a Civil Rights Act violation that involves hate. And a lot of times, a classic example, I experienced this weekend actually, was someone calling someone a homophobic comment or a racist comment as they're walking down the street. It's upsetting, it's infuriating, frankly, and it's distressing when it happens to you. But it's not a crime necessarily. So there's not, people can be, unfortunately, horrible people. We can't police all of that. But it still is, so that's what makes it a hate incident. It may be, now they're important to understand when hate incidents occur, and it still may be important to report them when they occur, because hate incidents can escalate into crimes. In my example this weekend, I have read many a scenario where instead of walking away, a person, who is targeted by kind of a racist or homophobic comment turns and confronts the person who said that to them. And then that person who, started this, instigated this, assaults them. So a hate incident can evolve into a hate crime in the context of a specific incident, or it could be a series of incidents that that person engages in. So knowing about it is important for law enforcement to be aware of. Or depending on the circumstances, a hate incident could be a form of discrimination. You walk into a business and the business owner says, we don't serve black people here. That's a hate incident, but it's also discrimination. You can't do that. A business cannot refuse service to someone because of their race. So, there could be other things that have occurred that are actionable. Many times where hate incidents occur, there are situations where it's protected by the First Amendment. And so I think of a couple of court cases when I think of these examples. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case from the early 2000s called Cheshire in Virginia. It involved the burning of crosses. And so in Virginia, they had a law that basically said the public burning of a cross is an act of intimidation that can be a crime. In two different cases that were consolidated when they made their way to the United States Supreme Court, they were heard by the court together. A group of KKK members was charged with violating the statute when they were holding a rally on land they were invited to be on, and they burned the cross at the end of the rally, and that was visible from a public roadway. In the other case, there was a black family that recently moved into a neighborhood. Some of their neighbors who were white had a habit of firing guns in their backyard. Disturbed by the gunshots, the black family called the police, and the police asked the neighboring family to stop. In response, members of that family went onto the black family's property and burned a cross in their lawn. The United States Supreme Court said, burning a cross in the black family's lawn is not protected by the First Amendment. Like, that was clearly a threat designed to intimidate that family. But burning the cross on the kind of land they were invited to use that might have been visible to a public roadway, that was protected by the First Amendment because it was a speech-oriented activity, and there wasn't enough evidence to show there was an intent to threaten anyone in doing that. We can probably disagree on whether or not that was the case, but unfortunately it's the United States Supreme Court and they get to do what they want. Another example of a case that kind of comes to mind, and it didn't go to the United States Supreme Court, but it made it to an appellate court, so a mid-level court in the federal system, comes out of Skokie, Illinois. This, I think, was back in the 70s, and then a neo-Nazi group wanted to march through a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and when you think of the 1970s, there were many Holocaust survivors and others who were directly affected, either had family members or they themselves were directly affected by the Holocaust, living in this neighborhood. And the city tried to prohibit the neo-Nazi group issuing them a permit to have their march through town. And they sued, and the neo-Nazi group won. Because they have a First Amendment right to engage in their demonstration, and the city can't, because of their message, refuse to issue them a permit. But that's still going to be a very disturbing and upsetting incident to the people in that community. It's still going to interfere with their rights. It is just something that is protected by the First Amendment, and therefore it falls into the category of a hate incident. So, and all of that's covered in the pamphlet. Not in that level of detail, but it's all in the pamphlet. Well, let's talk about reporting. How do you make a report when you experience a hate crime or a hate incident, and why should you make that report? So, if you believe you've been the victim of a hate crime, or a Civil Rights Act violation, or even if you're unsure, and I heavily emphasize if you're unsure, you should report it to local police, the Attorney General's office, or the FBI. And if you are ever in a circumstance where you feel like you are in immediate danger, the call should be 911. There's no wrong way to report these incidents. If you call me, I'm probably going to call the local police department and ask them and let them know what had happened, or I'm going to call my partners in the federal government and let them know what happened. Just like if you call the local police, they will let us know. We make sure this information gets to the people who can act on it most effectively. But delays in reporting can be a problem. If you wait too long, you might lose evidence. You might not be able to identify witnesses who were there and saw what happened if they're able to leave before the police arrive. If if it's something that happened online or involved, surveillance footage, you're hoping maybe there's surveillance footage that captured it. If you wait a few days, that may be gone. There may be no way to recover that footage to be able to kind of show and try to identify people who were involved. So delays can cause problems. But why report? There are a few reasons. One, if a crime occurs, it can't be addressed if it isn't reported. Same thing with a Civil Rights Act violation. If we don't know it happened, we can't do anything about it. But you as the person who experiences a crime, maybe you're assaulted and you're injured, or your home is vandalized, there are laws that help provide compensation to kind of redress the financial harm you may suffer through the Victims' Compensation Program or other statutes that might make it so you can have your home fixed. Or if you need medical care, that can be paid for, because it can be expensive sometimes if you're injured to have to go to the hospital. So there are avenues to recover those costs. There also may be a need for resources for your community at large, where you've been affected by a hate motivated incident. Other people who look like you, or live like you, or worship like you, maybe just as, maybe not just as, but affected in a similar way to what you've experienced, and they may need support and resources kind of directed to them to help them navigate what they're feeling and what that means, or to kind of just be heard about the effect that that has had on them. So reporting it allows those resources to be directed appropriately. It also your report may help identify suspects in other cases. And it's funny, because you think, oh, well, how does that help? I've seen it happen. When the one upside of kind of being a central repository for all of this is I've seen how cases connect to each other over time. And sometimes something that happens in town A, something similar happens in town B, and town B identifies who did it. So we want to make sure town B lets town A know who did it there, because that might mean that that person did it in town A too, because they might be neighboring towns, or there might be some link that that person, the suspect, has between those different communities. We can connect those dots when we know those things happen. But again, if they're not reported, if town B, the person in town B never reported it, we'd never figure out what happened in town A. And even if a crime hasn't occurred, it could be valuable information later on. If that person, it's a hate incident, someone says a homophobic or racist comment or offensive comment at you on the street, you report it, that person may later assault someone who for the same reason they shouted at you. And that evidence of what they did to you could help identify a hate motivation and what they did to someone else. So that information is valuable to law enforcement, it's valuable to those of us who investigate these things, and incredibly helpful. So I always, when in doubt, always report it. And like I said, even thinking of the example of the burning crosses, sometimes the line between what is a crime and what is actionable and what might be protected by the First Amendment is fine and difficult to identify. So if you just think, oh, well, it's just, that's First Amendment, maybe it's not. Maybe it was a crime that time because it was harassment that time. Maybe because it was a threat and it was kind of on that threshold. We know about it, we can take action on it when it happens. Now, what happens when you report? What should you expect when you report something? In most circumstances, I always start with this, most circumstances, police may not be able to arrest someone immediately. There are rules about when police can arrest someone and when they have to get a warrant to arrest someone. Actually, not even just rules, laws about when they have to. So they will likely need to investigate and apply for a search warrant or an arrest warrant. When there's suspicion of hate motivation, police will do a thorough investigation to confirm that before determining they lack evidence. So it is a bit of a no stone unturned. We want to make sure before we tell someone, no, we don't think there's enough there to charge this as a hate crime or a Civil Rights Act violation, that we've done everything we can to confirm that that is the case. Because the worst thing that can happen is, oh, we don't think there's anything there, and then someone produces a bunch of evidence, and it's like, oh, actually, you want to be thorough. And you want people to have confidence in the investigation that you've done. As I said, proving motivation can be challenging, and that's why it requires compelling evidence. That's also why it requires a thorough investigation. Police should also engage with my office. You should expect that if you report something to your local police department alleging a hate crime, they should engage with my office, and we will engage with our federal partners when that's appropriate, or when they might be able to help, or when they might be interested in pursuing charges. And we will pursue any and all charges we can across the different levels of government. We can also work to connect you, the person who's making the report, with resources that you may need, or that you may want. And you should also expect to be kept informed about the case and the investigation. So if you're talking with a police officer, recognize that if it's 11 p.m. and you're calling to report a crime, that same officer may not be in the office 9 to 5 most days when you want to go and check on things. So maybe you want to ask for a point person, like who should I contact if I have questions about my case? So there's someone that you can talk to who will be reliably available, because most officers, their schedules vary so much. It may not always be the same person that is there when you call them for assistance. And the same thing is true if there's a prosecutor that's involved, or if my office is involved. Ask for who is a good point of contact, who should I talk to if I have questions about what's going on. And also know that we will always work to try to protect your privacy. I know when I write complaints, we file our lawsuits, I use initials. I don't name victims in those complaints, because you didn't ask to be a part of this process. And so I will work to protect your privacy when we go through this, and that's the same thing is true of most prosecuting offices and most police departments. You have a right to that privacy. Certainly, that's your choice. If you want to go public and you want to be known, that's okay. That's your choice as well. But we're not going to be the ones to kind of say, oh yeah, this person is this is the victim, and we're going to put you in front of a camera and make you speak to the media. Like, that's not going to happen. And so that's the legal response. That's the kind of how do we bring the cases. What happens when you report, why you should report. But what are other ways to respond to hate incidents? Because legal responses aren't the only way to address them, and sometimes they're not even the most powerful way to address hate incidents. Often, and I've seen this in multiple communities, it's when the community comes together to support victims, to support the communities affected. Whether it's through vigils, rallies, or other displays of solidarity, those have the most powerful impact, and they are the most direct counter to the message of hate. Because what counters that you are not safe and you are not welcome here, then your community standing in the light of day to show support for you and to show support for your community. To tell you that you are welcome here, to tell you that you will be safe and respected, and that you should celebrate who you are. That is the message that directly counters what hate crimes are designed to do, and that is where the community coming together is most powerful. Law enforcement can kind of punish, we can try to prevent. We can't counter that direct message in the same way. We can certainly show, we can stand with you in that solidarity, but when it's your community, your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones who are saying, even strangers, saying, we are not going to welcome this in our community and we welcome you instead. That is the powerful message. That is the message that, at the end of the day is going to be what minimizes, we may never eliminate hate entirely, but minimizes the impact of hate and hate-motivated acts. And they also, working with your community, can ensure that cases don't become forgotten. Sometimes, especially when you think of vandalism, you may not know who did that. It may take time to identify a suspect. And it can be easy in kind of the rush of, especially for law enforcement, the rush of the next call for assistance, the next crime that occurs, the next crisis, to forget something that happened months and months ago. I promise you it doesn't get forgotten. But sometimes it can feel like you've been forgotten. And that community support can continue to shine a light on it and be a point of advocacy to say, this will not be forgotten. We want to make sure that this gets addressed and resolved. And with that, happy to take any questions. I'll be on the panel, so I'll take other questions then, but if anyone has questions about what I've talked about so far, please feel free. Yes?
Hi, I'm Rose Condanis. I work with a group of people who are interested in compassion within our community. And so the one thing we did not address, and I know maybe because you are a lawyer, but is, not in that way. Yes, no, my question is, what do we do if we are not just witnessing, but want to respond in that situation, but not in an illegal way?
Right. So I think, so you're witnessing, so you're there kind of and you see something happen. The best thing to do is, obviously provide assistance to the person who's been harmed. But I wouldn't necessarily encourage someone to kind of insert themselves into the middle of a confrontation, because that can become dangerous for you, it could escalate it unnecessarily. But I think of if you see someone kind of putting up, handing out hate literature in the street, or shouting homophobic comments or horrible comments at someone, making a note of who's there, who is that person, what do they look like, where did they go, because maybe if police respond, they're going to want to be able to figure out where that person went, where the lines of security cameras downtown, where are we going to look for to figure out, maybe we find out where this person parked, we can get a license plate and identify that person. So being kind of the eyes, because that person, when this has happened to them, it's jarring. You're not necessarily thinking through and gathering out, you're not kind of collecting all of that information, and you may be overwhelmed by what happened. So having those extra eyes who can say, I saw this happen, the person went that way, or I saw it, you can be that neutral witness to it. It's a powerful tool, it's important. I often tell police, when there are witnesses there, get their statements. Because one, if you don't get it then, you may never find that person again to get their statement later. But two, every piece of evidence that corroborates the victim's version of what happened strengthens your case. It may strengthen the evidence of hate motivation, it may strengthen the evidence of what the crime was that occurred. And so the more people that you have that can show what happened and say what happened, the better off your investigation will be, the better off the prosecution will be. So being that witness, being supportive, and then, again, when it is safe, if you provide support to that person, make sure they're okay. If you see someone maybe shouting at someone on the street, and don't necessarily insert yourself in the middle, but maybe it's stand with that person and just kind of talk to them and kind of deflect attention away from what's happening to them. I think of, you think of examples in larger cities where there are subways of maybe women or people being harassed on the subway, and someone just comes up and stands with them and chats with them. They don't know who that person is, but it's someone who's trying to kind of deflect attention away and support that person in that moment. So those are other ways that I would, the one thing to always bear in mind is kind of your safety as well, because you don't want to jump into the middle of something and start yelling back at that person, and now we've thrown gas on the fire, and it's, what was just, might have been an incident becomes a crime that affects a lot of different people. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Aronson. Hi, Sean. I'm really intrigued by the case you gave of the guy with the tattoos and the person in the French Resistance. So if that story had not ended as it had, and the store owner had asked him to leave, could that not also be considered a hate incident of rejecting to serve a person because of their appearance?
So it depends on the circumstance. So being, if I'm recalling that case correctly, the circumstance was, like you said, he had some paraphernalia on him, whether it was tattoos or clothing, that kind of showed signs that he was a neo-Nazi. That's not a protected characteristic. That is not, as a business owner, you don't have to condone, a particular person's political point of view or a person's speech. So if you have a business and someone is harassing someone else in the business, you can tell that person you need to leave. It doesn't matter, as long as it's not discriminatory, as long as it's motivated by protected characteristics. So it would be, in that circumstance, okay for that person to refuse business to that particular individual because of their kind of political beliefs or their First Amendment activity. But if it was solely because of that person's again, race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, that's when it starts to become an act. That's when it may become an act of discrimination.
I would like to give voice. Excuse me. I would like to give voice to intervening. That this woman talked about being responded to. I think that we need to intervene more. I believe that there are many people walking away from many instances where an intervention of some kind of verbal comment or, you know, more than just standing with the other person. Again, I want to underscore that I think people are walking away too frequently, and that we do need to intervene. And I would encourage people to do that.
And I think that's, you know, and I don't want to say like intervention, like I can't think of all the best, but I just want also always caution.
Right, you want to be safe.
Yes.
But, you know, there are times when, you know, in terms of elder abuse, child abuse, you just should not be walking away. In fact, law mandates that you don't.
Yep. Yes.
I'll talk to you about it.
Okay.
Because I just want to, because, you know, that Rabbi Dan's question, I just want to follow up.
Sure.
So we can just talk about it.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's take just one more question or comment. Then we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. You're going to have the opportunity to work in a group and talk about some of these issues. So I just don't want to get too far off schedule. So one more comment.
Yeah, I'm Patrick Meehan. I'm curious about your indication that the community response sometimes is much more effective and powerful. My question is, how can we create a community-based restorative justice process in collaboration with our legal system so that we can almost, to your point of intervention, have the parties that were harmed, the needs of the harmed parties drive that process, and the impact on the community as a whole. Because I think we could address a portion of these crimes without having to go through the legal system, which at times creates more harm than the actual incident that happened, especially in small communities like here in Cheshire County. So I'm really interested in that, creating that process.
I think, you know, and I want to emphasize, I'm not an expert in restorative justice and all the different models, but I know there are efforts to study those models in certain aspects. Again, particularly looking at incidents that might involve juveniles, to kind of divert people away from the criminal law enforcement system, but to also give voice to addressing the incidents, kind of restoring everyone who's involved so that they can feel like they've been heard, they've been kind of respected, and they've gotten what they need through the system without going through kind of a formal judicial process that occurs. So, you know, I don't know that there are kind of great exemplars I would hold up in New Hampshire right now, at least not in, like, there might be kind of community-oriented ones that never make their way to kind of police or to the legal system. But I certainly am not aware of one that necessarily kind of engages the legal system directly. So that's something that is, I know advocates have kind of raised, and it's hopefully going to end up being studied to identify potential models for that going forward. So I don't have a great answer, but...
No, I wasn't expecting an answer, but if you're identifying a potential need and opportunity. So, nice to hear.
So I'll turn it back over to ACF.
Got all of your blood flowing, everybody's getting excited. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. When you come back, we're going to have you work in smaller groups. We do those, not so fast, everybody. You gotta, go, not so, wait. You got to count. If I've done this right, there'll be 10 of you in each group. You have a group conversation about what were you expecting to hear about hate crime from Sean's presentation, and what incident has occurred in your community, your work environment. However, this is not a time for you to talk about your specific case, but it is for you to talk about an incident that may have occurred. So let's do this. If I can just get you to count off, you know, count off to be in groups. All right, so we're going to start here with group 10. 1, 2, 3, 4.
There's someone who can pick up the torch when your children graduate and you might be
How
how can you do
So there's
parents and learn what they did because they can have them all.
A.C. Edwards said, my name is Ani Malachi. I am the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Commission for Human Rights. A lot of words. What we do is enforce New Hampshire's laws against discrimination. And as a very happy thing, 4 of my investigators are here today. They're so awesome. So, yeah, please, yes, absolutely. So what they do is hard hard work. They're looking at all of these charges that come in that we're taking from people who feel that they've been aggrieved. And they're the ones that are poring over the information that comes in. They are looking at the legal standard. They are interviewing people and weighing that information to make an informed decision on, does this meet the standard of the law, and what does that look like? And that is an appropriate part of the conversation for what we've been talking about today, because something bad can happen to you, something that bothers you or you're aggrieved by it. However, all wrongs, I have a cousin that's a lawyer, and she said this, she is so profound. She said, all wrongs are not actionable. So it's life. But we do the best that we can to make sure that if that wrong is actionable, that individual is being heard and that there is action that can be taken administratively regarding the respondent who did the thing, right? So it's a tough area, and I think we've heard all morning from the Attorney General, from comments that we've had from the 4 groups, and especially with Sean's explanation of the definitions, that there's a fine line. Sometimes you're dancing on the head of a pin and trying to figure out what's what. But I think if we all are working together and become a community that can help people who have been wronged, and also have some compassion, at least a little bit, or the person who is the bad actor, we'll say, then maybe we're that much further at being a better society, and we can work together to do what David would like to do, which is eradicate this issue altogether. So I think we're all in agreement. So I will give the microphone to Brandon, and each person's going to take a minute. They're going to introduce themselves, talk about what they do, and then after that, we'll start our active dialogue.
Thank you. Well, hello all again. I'm Brandon Baldwin. I work for the federal government in the U.S. Department of Justice. I work with a little arm of the Department of Justice called Community Relations Service, which we usually refer to as CRS. My official role is I'm a conciliation specialist. That is a lot of words that make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And oftentimes, much of the work that CRS does is a little bit ill-defined, because really what we do is we do what needs to be done to fill in the gaps that exist in terms of the work that is already being done on the federal level through the Department of Justice. But the Department of Justice is about courtrooms and law enforcement, and that's not what CRS Community Relations Service actually does. We don't do prosecutions, we don't do investigations. Instead, what we do is we work with local communities and partners to engage communities who are experiencing tension or conflict related to the areas of identity protected by federal civil rights law. And the areas of identity that are protected by federal civil rights law, there's a lot of intersection with New Hampshire law here. So it's race and skin color, it's national origin, it's religion, it's disability, it's gender identity, and it's sexual orientation. So again, we work with communities to engage community-level dialogue and response and prevention strategies so that hate crimes are not occurring in the future. That's a very shortened version, but I don't want to take up too much time because we got other great folks here.
Hello, my name is Eva Castillo. I'm originally from Venezuela. I live in Manchester. I'm a Manchester Police Commissioner since 2011. I'm an immigrant rights advocate, community organizer. I'm the director of the New Hampshire Alliance for Immigrants and Refugees and Welcoming New Hampshire. And my job is to advocate for immigrants and the well-being, to promote awareness about immigrants, act as a cultural broker, and bridge the gap between immigrants and every other aspects of the community, and especially law enforcement. And I feel the voices of hatred always are louder than the voices of love, and it's our time to overcome those voices becoming loud ourselves because we become too complacent, thinking that we're in the right side. And, you know, usually I tell my fellow activists, yes, there's some, you know, some people don't appreciate the job that the cops do, but I love cops. And I really, you know, by building relationships is what really changes the minds and the hearts of people. Data and studies and courses, they don't do anything really. Just building relationships when you see somebody as a human being, that's what makes you appreciate them. So I encourage everybody to go build relationships with people that you seemingly have nothing in common with, and you'll find that deep down inside we're so much more alike than we're different.
Hey everybody, Sean Hawk again. So I won't reintroduce myself, but I'll make two kind of notes. The first is kind of hearing some of the feedback is thinking about the idea of restorative justice and its importance. And I want to say, like, even though my role is an enforcement role, I am cognizant of and fully recognize the value and importance of restorative justice in those circumstances. Hate isn't something we're going to arrest our way out of or punish our way out of. It requires kind of people, and that's where I think I said during my statements, sometimes we have to think carefully about how we're approaching these because we want to provide protection to the person who needs it, but we also don't want to push the perpetrator of that further down a path of radicalization that might lead them into those toxic wasteland corners of the internet where they find sympathy and they find people who are willing to help them embolden themselves and kind of take them further down a darker path. So, you know, I fully endorse and support kind of efforts to kind of rethink how to address these issues in our communities. And then the second piece, I'll go on my toxic wasteland of the internet piece. In the context of when we were discussing that, I fully stand by that because there are a lot of times on the internet where people will say things that they would never dare say to someone's face because you would see the hurt and the pain that you caused to that person, but you don't see it when it's online. So you say, oh, it doesn't matter. And it still causes that same level of harm, but you don't get, that person doesn't see the reaction. But I will put a star on that and say, the internet can also be a beautiful place for a lot of people in the sense that there are people where, like, if you are the only person, you know, if you think you're the only, like, gay person or trans person in your community, you can find community on the internet of people who will support you and be there for you where you may not find it in your physical community. Same thing, like, if you're a person with a disability and there aren't a lot of people like you in your community, you can find that online and it can be a great place and a powerful tool. The dark side is that there are people who also hold very terrible views or very terrible beliefs that find that same community on the internet. So it is a great and terrible thing. But in times when you talk about arguing with people on the internet, just don't do it. It's not worth it.
Hello, I'm Eli Rivera. I'm the sheriff for Cheshire County, and I've been in law enforcement for about 35 years, retired from King Police. I have to say my primary job as sheriff is basically the enforcement of civil laws and criminal laws. You know, our law, our statutes, we have thousands and thousands of laws in our books that, as law enforcement, we enforce a portion of that. And with those laws, we have discretion of what we do or not do, whether we do enforce an arrest or not arrest. So we use that on a daily basis. Probably over the past 10 years since I became elected sheriff, I've kind of done some transitioning into what my focus is. And it's basically been on criminal justice reform, whether it's with mental health, homelessness, public health issues that affect our communities. So I've been focusing some on that because I feel it's important. And my number one priority has been human rights, whether it's tolerance, LGBTQ community, immigration, whether documented or undocumented. I feel that as a person of color myself, that I need to be their voice and be able to speak on their behalf for those who don't have it. So I have taken challenging positions. Sometimes I'm not too agreeable by some of my colleagues in law enforcement, but I think I need to have that voice at times where, and especially in today's society.
So what we will do now, before I go to the other place, an amazing panel of people here. So you have a wide variety of perspectives, different front porches are sitting before you. So this will be the perspective that will start some of the questions, and we're looking at the questions that you all sent in. So I'll maybe do one, maybe do two, and then we'll see how the conversation goes. This whole thing is not to be a training where you're sitting and just listening to information. It is to be as interactive as we can make it with the limited amount of time we have. And if we had 3 days to do this, it still wouldn't be enough time. So we would always still need 2 more minutes. So just, that's just going to be the way these things go, right?
That.
Yeah, that's a good one now.
So we will do our very best. If there are questions, I would like to give a couple of guardrails. So making sure that you speak very loudly and clearly, slowly, so everyone can hear you. Understanding that you might be nervous because this might be the largest group of people you've ever spoken in front of. And that's okay, we're all here for the same reason and we support you. So if you stumble over your words, guess what? Just take a deep breath and start over, it's no big deal. We're all family. And the other thing is making sure that whatever comments we're making or questions we're asking or examples that we're giving are specifically relevant to whatever the topic is that we're talking about in the moment. So, what do I mean by that? We've all had different levels or different kinds of experiences over our lifetime, and all of those things are valuable, and all of those things are important because they're a part of who you are, and we enjoy that you're here. And with that said, we have a limited amount of time and we want to get as much content in as we can. And I don't want to, play the music at the award show and try to take the microphone from you. But I want to be respectful of people who look like they're about to explode and really want to participate in the conversation. So, all of that said, and any of you that are neurodivergent like myself, you didn't remember any of it, but it's in there somewhere, so it's fine. So, I'll start with the first question that was sent in when some of you all registered. So we've sort of talked about this already, but I still think there's some more stuff we can squeeze out. So the question is, how can people combat hate when they feel as if they're facing hurdles or roadblocks? And when thinking about this, I thought about, is advocacy an opportunity? Is it identifying the roadblocks or the issues or the people that might be the issues? So just throwing out those thought balloons, and which one of you would like to jump on that first? I knew it. I knew it. I was hoping she'd raise her hand
If I don't
first.
volunteer, nobody will do it, so, let the foreigner lead.
Go, Ava.
Okay. What the hell was the question?
This is why I love this woman in a non-sexually harassing way. So, how can people combat hate?
Okay, perfect. Okay.
When there's roadblocks.
Roadblocks are in everything that you do in life in this country, believe me, So, I would say, first of all, do not repeat the issue. Say, if somebody is, using the N-word, do not refer to the N-word continuously when you put a press release. Because that only gives more power to the people. And the news keep adding, I hear it with the immigration, when people use the I-word, by the way, no human being is illegal. And people keep referring and using that word. Counteract that. Speak up. We have to be proactive. We have to, there's so much that we can do. We can put press releases, we can gather people and have films, film discussions about what, in my case, what it means to be an immigrant. Putting the human face to the stories, because we tend to make numbers out of people, depersonalize them, so it's easier to hate the other when you do not see a human face and you do not see a father and a mother or a spouse or a child. It's so much easier to just talk about those people, whatever the others are. So, we can do vigils, but usually I'm so big in building relationships. Because whatever it is that makes us different really is totally meaningless, because we all have the same essence. We're all human beings. But don't repeat the objectionable thing, you know. Don't reuse that over and over and over, because that's giving more power to them. Just counteract and forget all about that and just do your own thing. You don't need to keep referring to that.
Yeah.
But talk. See something, say something. Don't just remain quiet.
Anybody else?
There, the two talkers here together.
I would argue that this work is defined by hurdles and roadblocks.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to wait for a time where there would be no hurdles and roadblocks to doing this work, that would be the exact same world where hate crimes did not exist in the first place. Take inspiration from people who've done this work before and are doing this work around you right now. The people who are our inspiration aren't people who are doing the work under circumstances of ease and leisure. The reason why they're the inspiration for the work that we do is because we know that they confront hurdles and roadblocks, and yet somehow they were able to persevere and continue to do the work anyway. And that is, by definition, what defines this work.
See, you inspire them.
So I think the other piece here to think about is that, like, as Brandon said, there are always going to be hurdles. There are always going to be setbacks. You have moments where you kind of have this shining point of light where you're like, hey, we've achieved something great here. And eventually there may be pushback. There may be roadblocks that come kind of looking forward. Sometimes kind of resolving an issue or moving the ball forward may involve compromise. But as kind of the advocate or the person doing this work, it's okay, we have this compromise now to move the ball forward a little bit. I'm not done. Let me pick the ball up and try to keep moving that forward. It may mean, it may take time to kind of build relationships and change people's minds and get them to understand. And I think, and we're not talking like weeks. We could be talking years or decades of work that people have committed themselves to push these conversations forward. And it can be, early on, a lot of roadblocks, but, coming in good faith, coming kind of willing to help however you can, you build those relationships and you become that person, someone who initially was like, I don't think we need to talk to you, or I don't think we need your help. Let's call that person. We want to talk to you now. And you become that person that they go to when they have a question or and that's your ability. You build that relationship and then they trust you and they believe you when you say, this is a problem that needs to be fixed, or this is a problem that someone needs to look into. And you move the ball forward that way. And it can be hard. But, as I think, again, as Brandon pointed out, like, if those roadblocks and hurdles weren't in the way, we probably wouldn't need to be having these conversations right now. So it is important to remember that, with important work comes hard work. And that's what this is. And to not shy away from that. But to also, when you're doing this, always make sure that you take time to take care of yourself and kind of inventory what you need in a moment, because I love this phrase and I will use it all the time. You cannot give from an empty vessel. And if you give completely of yourself and there's nothing left, you're not able to kind of do the work that you want to do or need to do in the way you want to do it. So take that time for yourself as well.
Well, I'm going to go a little different. Hate is going to be with us, one way or the other, in one form or the other. You heard the mayor this morning said that several years ago he was able to pass legislation that included equality. We're talking 21st century. We're still changing laws to reflect who we are. At the same time, we're adding laws that are hateful. So this is here to stay, and we just need to be guardians of that and fight against those laws that are hateful or still remain in the books that need to be removed. We still have generations that among us that experienced hate when they were growing up, whether by through segregation or right to vote, that are still living. And so we need to, so we need to, as a community here, just remind ourselves that we need to do the best that we can to remove that word. But as long as we have these differences about what is hateful and what is not, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
So I would add, yeah, 1 second, I would add a little piece to that too, with doing the advocacy and building relationships. There has to be, or at least I personally feel there has to be, a level of understanding and a little pinch of kindness when you're dealing with people that you don't agree with. You can be passionate and bring your passion about whatever the topic is that you're having a conversation, but the whole point of the conversation is to actually be heard. The person still may not agree with you, so me yelling at you so that you'll agree with me is never going to happen. If we can have a conversation, I may disagree with your perspective and you mine, but if we can have a rational conversation, and if I can actually open my ears and open my mind to have space for your perspective, it doesn't mean I have to agree with it, and you don't have to agree with mine, but we have now created space for each other to have conflicting ideas, but a calm conversation where now we can build relationship, because guess what? There'll be something else down the road that we're both going to agree on, and wouldn't it be better to have that person by my side? That's one more person I can count on whatever the issue is that I'm looking at. And I keep looking over here at my favorite people in black, blue, and green. And Ava will tell you, I've known her for a couple of years, but law enforcement, so that's an easy one because they're sitting in the room, right? We've been talking about it for I don't know how many years. But having a calm conversation, getting to know your chief, getting to know the troopers that are in your neighborhood. It's like that song, Who Are the People in Your Neighborhood from Sesame Street? It's getting to know those people, but in a time where it's a dispassionate time, not when I'm in an emergency. I'm just walking over, it's like, hey, I just want to introduce myself. I live on the street, I live in the community, and I just wanted to say hello and be brave and do that. And that goes so much further with them, because it may create this relationship where you get to find out what it looks like from their shoes when they're on the road. So it creates compassion and understanding on both sides of an issue that you may not agree on, but we can still be there for each other. So that's my soapbox. And you had a question. Can you yell it for me?
Excuse me?
Can you yell it?
Yes, definitely. But what you guys are saying is incredibly valuable. Unfortunately, though, too often the relationship, the onus to build that relationship falls on the one that's experiencing the hate and that community, and that's incredibly draining. And I think that that to put that as the solution discredits the fact that the ones creating the hate are indeed draining that vessel and keeping those hated down. And how can we expect them to build a relationship if for instance, I can build a relationship with somebody who is passively homophobic or queerphobic. I cannot build a relationship with somebody who's willing to put on social media their hate. And too often that gets put back on me, that I am not willing to enter into a relationship with somebody who is vocally against my existence. And I don't know what the bridge is there when we are expected to build that bridge.
So I'm going to answer that, and then I'll give the microphone over. So in saying that, it is not necessarily putting the responsibility on you or anyone in this room to go find people that hate you to say, hey, I want to be friends.
That's
That's
right.
not,
Yeah,
you
please
know, so
accept.
we know just from the psychology that we look at online, you don't have to engage with toxic people.
That's right.
So the point of the exercise is the people that are around you that you may not know, that want to know who you are in terms of engaging in relationship. So it's not just saying that you're responsible, it's saying that we are all responsible for participating. So if I see you in the grocery store, I may just say hello and start chit-chatting, and we may find out that we like the same kind of coffee because we're in the coffee aisle, and maybe we decide to go have lunch. Relationship. If I'm yelling at you about your coffee and telling you that you're an awful person because you bought this coffee because it's from this country, there's no conversation there, right? But you also don't know what just knowing you might do to change my perspective in the world, because we can have a conversation, I can ask you a question that I'm not really sure what the answer is, and you might be able to answer that question for me in a way that is, if I'm asking it in a respectful way, you can answer it equally as respectful. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but again, not necessarily putting all the responsibility on you, because it's not one person's job to carry the world, other than Atlas. That was his job. Wasn't it Atlas who has the world on his back? Was that him?
Atlas, yeah.
He's the only one that's responsible for carrying the world on his back. Okay.
Let me see if they want to,
I'm gonna have them answer. I'm gonna come to you and then you.
you have anything? You don't have to.
I have a slight amount.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that it's important that the message of figure out who you can work with and who you can talk with, that message isn't just shared with individuals, and that same message is given to institutions, right? Because as you said, too often the onus, the responsibility is on people who are impacted by others' hate and bias. And so all of us who represent institutions need to figure out our own outreach strategies and who we can work with and talk with, so that if we're an educational institution or a government institution or a healthcare institution or a law enforcement institution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we shouldn't be waiting for people to come to us to engage us in conversations. We need to get out there and be proactive in making sure that we are doing our own outreach and making sure we're engaging people in marginalized communities as well.
And let me add something more community-oriented. You know, most people are in the middle. The haters are gonna remain haters regardless of how much you talk to them, so don't bother. Send them like the smokers, send them outside to do their thing. Do not include them, do not bother. Your allies are gonna be your allies. Most people are in the middle. Those are the people that we should try to talk to in a different way. You know, and it is unfortunate that the burden is placed upon us many times to educate the people. But every encounter is a two-way learning experience. My first time that I talked to a cop, I didn't like them. And little by little, I built a relationship with them. But they're learning from me too. They're learning to dispel the myth that all immigrants are a bunch of whatever it is that, you know, people have. So every encounter is a chance of learning on both sides. Just let the smokers outside. Just keep them out. You know, don't even bother with them. But we have a chance with the people that really are in the fence, that are at least willing to talk to you respectfully and listen to you. And little by little, you don't build trust overnight. I've been working with the police almost 40 years. And believe me, you know, I lose most of my battles, but we still have a seat at the table. We still do not agree, but I still like them, and they respect me, and I respect them. And sometimes I get upset with some of the stuff that happens, but it is what it is, and we need to keep moving forward. You know, we cannot make people that disagree with us our enemies. Just moving forward. You want to say something?
And I would just say, because you mentioned institutions, and it is difficult to be an individual person confronting what feels like an institution. It probably feels impossible, and it may be in certain circumstances, and that's where, you know, like the people in this room, like the conversations that are happening here, finding people who share your same concern and building a network so you're not standing alone. Yep. You're standing with other people who can be that voice, so you don't always have to be that person who has to carry the torch and build sustainable movements. I know we were in the same group, so I talked about kind of in the school setting, you have parents whose children might be Jewish or children who might be Black, and they're facing kind of bullying and harassment and discriminatory behavior in school, and they want the school to fix it. But it's not like that, you know, there are other people who probably have kids who are experiencing the same thing or might feel the same way or feel like this is wrong, and it's build that network, because in a few years your kids aren't gonna be in school anymore. Your voice is kind of gonna go out of the conversation as you move on with your life, and it may fade. So it's that building that sustainable network So that way the conversation continues and it doesn't just end when when you say, I don't have the energy for this anymore. There are other people who can kind of pick up and carry forward. You're stronger in shining a light on an issue together, but also in kind of being able to share the burden of, and I agree, it is unfair that the burden a lot of times falls on the person who wants to see change. Like that is a reality, and it's not a fair reality, and it's not a right reality, as I think Brandon alludes to. The people who hold that power and those institutions should be engaging with their communities as well to learn. But unfortunately, that's not always how it works. And so having a community that you can share that burden with so it doesn't always fall on you is a powerful way to kind of also be able to move the ball forward.
I would just say that sometimes we need to make sure that we engage the right people in the conversation, because sometimes I might not be the right person to engage with them. And as we were ending our last 2 minutes, I think in our conversation, one thing I said is, as a young adult, I look up and say I see chaos among adults, because they're trying to deal with the issues in hand. You know, they're trying to learn from us, and we sometimes don't have it together. So sometimes we might need to reach down to the new generation to see what they're seeing and what their perspectives are, because if you're watching the TV or watching the issues that are going on among the people in leadership or people that are handling these matters, fighting or in their own self, they're going to say, what are the expectations of me when you can't get it together yourself?
So, yes.
So I would like to just shed a light on my particular corner of the world. I'm a representative in the New Hampshire House, and I think any opportunity to engage people one-to-one, but better in groups like this, is the most important thing people can do. We live in some way in a state with a legislature that's particularly democratic. In some ways, it isn't particularly democratic, but in the sense that every bill gets a hearing, anybody can come and testify about every bill. It creates an opportunity for dialogue that doesn't exist in many states. And as Sheriff Rivera said, this is a place where you can come and confront laws that are on the books that you want to remove, or laws that are being promoted that you might be for or against. And I know that if I'm promoting a bill that's favorable for immigrants and Ava shows up with her buddies, that's a good sign, that there'll be a lot of people to come to talk about that bill. So this is kind of a built-in opportunity in New Hampshire for people to come and speak about issues that are really important to them. And I know before I did it, I couldn't imagine doing it, but really anybody can do it, and everybody does do it. And if you can't come to speak about a bill that's demeaning trans people because you have to work that day, don't worry, there'll be another bill a few days later that you can talk
That's
about.
true.
So I would just encourage people to be involved that's one opportunity to be involved in talking about issues that are really important to you.
And if you can't attend, you can weigh in. And you can also write your testimony and email it, and they actually read all of that. So they'll, at the hearing for bills, because I have to testify on behalf of my commission, they will say that, so let's say they've gotten 50 pieces of written testimony, they'll say, and we've got 35 people that are for this bill and 25 that are against, because they're actually looking at it. So it's a very unique opportunity. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to address what she had said earlier about sometimes being tired, being the one that have to, speak to, we're the one that experience it. One thing that I've learned, and yes, it is exhausting. It is very tiring being the one that's always trying to address this issue. But what I've learned in my experience, we're going to have the haters. But those are the ones you want to engage. Here's why. Because engaging it, I learned two things. One, either you're going to be a peacemaker or a peacekeeper. What is the difference? A peacekeeper is one who want to keep status quo, don't want to rock the boat, don't want to cause any conflict, but know that these things are going on. A peacemaker who recognizes and sees the things that are going on, that knows that even if I speak, I may cause more conflict, but have the ability through that conflict to bring in that peace. And so now you're able to address the hater. Now, how the hater responds really determines your ability to bring the peace. So I know it's exhausting. I have found being a peacemaker brings us so much further to having the relationships you was talking about.
So I'll move on to the next question and then we'll do our round robin. This is actually really good. So I have no idea if we're going to get to any more than this one, but I think we've done a good work, even if this is the last one due to time. So how can people access data on hate crimes reporting, whether it's statewide or Cheshire County, and I know who I'm giving that to.
So in terms of kind of your hard data, looking at numbers, the New Hampshire State Police, they maintain a database that is searchable. You can actually search all kinds of crime data if you ever want to, but you can search by bias and you can search by county and by community within that county to see what your local police department or your county's police departments have reported in terms of the number of hate crimes that have occurred in those communities. And you can sort that data by bias type, so if it's race, religion, whatever the motivation is behind it, if you're ever curious as to what's going on. And it's certainly, and it's something that, both state police, my unit, others, we constantly work with law enforcement to ensure and kind of help improve that reporting so things are getting reported and those numbers can reflect what people's experiences are. And so it's, and that doesn't necessarily mean that every single report leads to an arrest, leads to a conviction. Sometimes you can't identify a suspect. Sometimes, a plea bargain leads to someone not being convicted of a hate crime or whatever it may be. But it at least gives you a sense of what's going on in your community. And again, that's that's what we're talking about crimes. We're not talking about all the other ways that hate manifests in our communities either. I don't know if you have.
Okay. All good.
Yeah. All data for me.
Thank you. So there are a couple of really interesting questions. I'm going to do this one very quickly. Someone asked, how do you help teachers recognize the problem and respond appropriately? So shameless plug here. The Governor's Advisory Council on Diversity and Inclusion, I happen to be the chair, and Sean is on the council as well. On the council's website, on the Human Rights Commission's website, on the DOE's website, there is what's called a bias toolkit. It has a much longer title that I cannot remember, way too many words. But that toolkit is there, it is free, it is accessible, it is downloadable for teachers to be able to use it. But I had a situation where someone who owns a daycare center reached out to me, and I was able to it was more of a facilitated conversation with the daycare center that had a situation. And the owner of the daycare center looked through the bias toolkit and said it was amazing and very helpful. So it's not something, although created for educators, it's not something that is only limited to educators. It talks about prevention, which is obviously what we all want to do. In terms of bias incidents, it talks about how to respond, and it does take into consideration the actor and the target, so that there's some balanced information on how to work with both, and then ways to respond and examples of things. Because I feel personally like when things don't happen, so if you're in a school setting, because we're talking about that, a response might be limited because how often are these issues brought to the teacher or the administrator? How many times do you have to deal with it? So if it's an unknown or an awkward problem and you don't know how to respond, sometimes the response ends up being no response, which is not a good response. So at least looking through this is helpful, and we are certainly accepting feedback. So from whatever group you're with, if you look through it and you have some suggestions, there's information on the website there. Just email it and say, toolkit or bias toolkit, and it'll get to me, and I'll take it to the Diversity and Inclusion Council, and we'll certainly talk about it. And those meetings are public. Yes, ma'am.
Just could you be specific again on where to look for it?
So let's see. Probably the easiest place to look for it is nh.gov/ HRC, because it's on our front page, and our website is from the 70s. So, so I'm sorry. And I think there was one other, okay. So, well, okay. So this was the question we talked about before, and I don't know, if it ends up being too vague, we can skip it and go to another one. When dealing with subtle or not so subtle animosity, how can community members start conversations to make sure the topic isn't ignored? Does that feel too vague for you all to respond to?
What I think is what Eva said before, sometimes, you can't have the conversation because the person is set on their ways, and it will create actually more conflict, and you unfortunately sometimes you need to just step away, unless it's someone who is based on their ignorance or not understanding more. This is the way I grew up. Who is willing to have that conversation about, hey, did you know this is this, oh, you know what, I always thought this was this. Well, here's a conversation. If you have someone who's set in their white supremacy, you can't have a conversation with them because that's just how they are. Versus someone who might use an expression because, oh, I used to hear that growing up and I thought it was okay. Well, it's not okay because of this and this and this. And those conversations we can have, and we can change their perceptions and understand that, hey, what you said is insensitive because of this and this and this, and someone, that's not what I meant. I didn't think it was meant to be in that format. Yeah, we can have those conversations and hopefully change that perception versus the ones that we know that they're just not gonna go anywhere. So I think those conversations can be had with those that we know we can versus someone who is just set in their ways.
Thank you. So, let's see, yes.
So one word or phrase that I have not heard this morning is trauma-informed responses. We've talked a lot about restorative justice, and I'm hearing hints of acknowledging people's trauma, but I wonder if we don't need to make that sort of a larger piece of the puzzle and have a Venn diagram with restorative justice and trauma-informed responses, because for both victims of hate and perpetrators of hate, there's very often deep trauma that informs why they do what they do. And unless we can acknowledge those, individuals' trauma, we can't really get beyond it and create some of those connections that we're trying to make.
Anyone want to respond to that? Okay, excellent.
I would just expand it outward to highlight that it's not just individual-based trauma, but it's community-based trauma as well.
And I would agree with that. I think that's, certainly sometimes it's easy to forget in doing what certainly I do, and I'm sure what law enforcement does to that is a component in the sense of it's what we live and breathe a lot of times, is trying to make sure we're acting trauma informed when we're doing things. And that's where, even when I look at sometimes how we might resolve a case with someone where we bring one, is sometimes there are folks where it's they might have, trauma in their life that had informed what they did. And it doesn't mean, there shouldn't necessarily be a consequence, but it's how can we address that trauma and make sure, and that's where I think I had listed some of the things we've advocated for in the past in some of these cases, is counseling in certain circumstances, because a person may have, their own kind of, whether they have mental illness or whether they have behavioral, needs that are not being met, that may be a component of what needs to be evaluated and assessed to help that person kind of move forward in society. So we do try to kind of look at the whole person and not just, you know, okay, you've done something bad, we're gonna kind of cast you aside, because the point and the hope is always that, you know, this kind of, whatever happened here, whatever kind of the incident was, becomes an aberration for that person. It's no longer kind of what they're kind of like to kind of have them move forward where this isn't a recurring issue, like a recurring behavior or practice. And that's, you know, but looking at them as the whole person and in dealing with that. And the same thing is true of engaging with those who might be the victims or the targets of these incidents. And I think I had said in my small group, you know, if a person isn't, you know, for whatever reason, sometimes it's an incident they have with a neighbor and that neighbor's been evicted and they just say, I don't want to go forward with anything. I don't want to pursue legal action. We try to take that, we do take that into account in deciding what we are going to do in those circumstances, because it can be incredibly traumatizing to have to go and relive an experience that you don't want to relive. It can be incredibly, it could stir up the person who is now out of their life and they feel safe. Now this legal process has begun and you have to re-engage with that person, and that can be re-traumatizing in a way. And so we do try to take that into account. We always leave the door open of, if there's a point where either this happens again or you feel like you need to go forward with this, re-engage with us and we can talk about that at that time. But where I am a firm advocate in what I do, at least. I know there's different priorities and sometimes in the criminal system of, I'm not going to drag someone through a process they have no desire to be a part of. It's not helpful to them. It's not necessarily going to lead to a good process or a good outcome for anyone. So that is kind of an important consideration there, is to not perpetuate further harm in the work that we do.
So there was a question that was sent in that, and I'm going to have a person from the audience answer this question, and she knows who she is. Yeah, I'm looking at you.
You.
No turning around. So the question is, what groups in Cheshire County are working on this topic? There's a broader question in terms of New Hampshire, so we can pass the microphone this way for that. And how do we know that they're working together? How are they communicating? Is there some information that can be stated to that? So do you want this or you got it?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Is this working?
Say who you are.
My name is Dottie Morris, and I work at King State College. So there is a citywide committee. It's called the Human Rights Committee, and a lot of work is being done there. And if you want to add more, please feel free to do so. So yeah, it's a great group. It's been around. It used to be called the Martin Luther King Jonathan Daniels Committee years ago, and so it's been in operation for many years. And we have. Are you the chair? No. You're the chair of the subcommittee. Yeah. So Rabbi Dan is also a member of that committee as well. And so we do a variety of things, including a Juneteenth event, a ULK event, and have written like a statement that's read at public meetings and things like that. So that's one group, and then there's a Monadnock region group, and it's pulling together both business and higher ed, and Dr. Gallagher is a member of the education subcommittee. Dr. Gallagher, if you don't know, is the principal of the high school, and is an active member of the education committee. And so it's throughout Monadnock.
What's the name of that group?
Monadnock, it's a long name. Monadnock Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging.
Oh, that's the newest one.
That's why I need a card for that. And it's a coalition, and it's a group of people who come together and are now working on a variety of different projects for the city, not the city, for the Monadnock region. So that's two of them. There might be others that we have going on. I know we have the interfaith group that's pretty.
Monadnock Interfaith Project, and I think we consider as one of our partners the city itself, but also the organization formerly known as the Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
The greater collaborative.
And not collaborative.
Oh.
And I think we all can do a better job of getting in the same room more often and
Yes.
having these conversations, because we are not always clear of what other groups are doing and how we're overlapping. And personally, I'd just love to see some better efforts at coordination and communication between the different groups.
So for a member of the public, how can they find you? Is there one place that has the information? Should they go to Keene?
Well, yeah, go to the city of Keene, and then I think they have a list of committees, right?
Yeah, it's under, I want to say, the board and commissions.
Yeah.
It's weird because we're a committee, but we're listed, I want to say, under the board and commissions. And
Okay,
then the
so
committees.
go to the Keene, City of Keene website, boards and commissions.
It's a
You can-
public meeting.
Public meeting, so you can find the Human Rights Committee.
Yes.
I was about to say commission.
Because we couldn't say commission.
Yes, and, yes.
Our vigils in Peterborough started on a Hancock, does a Monday night, it's the third Monday of the month, phone group meeting that they did before this started 4 years ago. And we also did Martin Luther King.
Nice.
Representative, yes.
I just wanted to say that there's also 3 or 4 groups that work with immigrants' rights and immigrant support, and it's really the response for all of those groups. It was initially a response to all the hateful rhetoric about immigration and immigrants in this country.
So here's your homework assignment. It looks like several groups are represented. So your homework assignment is to get the connecting information and decide how and where the variety of ways that you're going to promote information about your groups in a way that the larger community can find you, so that you can invite more people into the conversation and they can participate, so they feel like they're doing something.
Yeah, because I was gonna mention the,
I'm with the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State as well, and we're trying to do some of that work to build these bridges, but there's a lot of work for all of us to do, so.
Yeah. Excellent. So does someone up here have a comment about the statewide community things? And you don't have to, but just asking.
I just have a comment. Think of community not as a melting pot. Community should be a salad with many different components, and every ingredient keeps its own taste and color and shape and or origin, you know? The melting pot is bye-bye, you know, because melting, you melt everything and it's all gooey and everybody loses their own essence. Salad is where it's at. We all have to be, you know, we all have the right to be who we are, period. So, tolerance is not good enough. You know, it's acceptance. Tolerance, and I'm gonna say something that's kind of nasty, but that's tolerance. You tolerate a hemorrhoid when it goes away. You know? So tolerance is that you're putting up with something that really doesn't make you comfortable. You know? We need to accept people, let them be who they are and do whatever they want, you know? Acceptance. And then appreciation if you want to go further. But no tolerance and no melting pot. Yeah. No melting pot.
So here's a question, but I think we've answered it already. I'm just going to throw it out there, and I'll see a nod if we've answered it. So how can the community create opportunities for engagement to promote relationships, respect, responsibility, reassurance, all while working to repair and rebuild? And these actions would hopefully include the person or persons targeted, as well as the actors, when people are ready. So I think we sort of covered that.
I think we just need to be supportive of the organizations that are out there visibly promoting equality. You know, whether it's, if you see the folks over at the Peterborough intersection with the BLM signs, whatever, beep their horns, you know, give them a thumbs up. If you have a few more minutes, stopping them and catch up with them.
Yep.
Support Keen Pride during their week. Support, the international festival where we are talk about different cultures within our community. Just be visible and be out there and show your support by attending these events. That's one way that we can show support that we are for our people out there. And there's numerous other ways to do it, but that's some of the ways that you can visibly be out there and support people who are out there doing the work to promote equality in this community.
One thought too is I also think, like I had mentioned, kind of building a network. If there's something you care about, but and what we just heard, there are a lot of groups working in different areas in the region. So always check in with those groups too, see what they're doing, because they may already be doing work that you're passionate about, or could help kind of like serve the foundation or be the launching pad for work that you're passionate about. And so you have kind of that network already developed and built in. It doesn't always have to be reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. Like build on what others have done. I think of the cliche of we see further because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Like that's kind of the reality here when we're doing this work. And so build on what already exists. Don't necessarily feel like I have to start over. Please, because that also is a very draining aspect of work, and you find out, oh, someone else has already been doing this, and I've spent weeks and months or years of time trying to develop something, and it's already there. That definitely never feels good.
Yeah. So I'm starting with you, Brandon. So let's just take a minute each, and if there are any thoughts that you have to close out what we've been doing, and I know there's no way to really do that, but if there's some things that popped into the forefront while you've been listening to things, I want you to each take a minute and do that, and then I'll turn the microphone back over to AC Edwards.
Great. Thank you everyone for not only being here, but staying till the end. Much appreciated. I just have a few thoughts on the word isolation, just something that I've been thinking about. In terms of the comments about incidents of bias and hate and how important it is that we have trauma-informed approaches, I think one of the things that's important to remind ourselves, especially when we're not of marginalized identities, is that no incident of hate or bias happens in isolation. And that helps explain the impact on individuals and communities. It's that it is an accumulation of a lifetime of incidents that might occur to that individual or other folks that happen in other places. And so an act of hate never happens in isolation. And that's not just understanding how it came to be, but it's understanding the impact. They're aggregate, always, 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 always. It's not about isolation. Unfortunately, one of the great ironies of any act of hate and bias is that it, by definition, creates isolation for individuals and communities who are impacted. It is designed to separate individuals and communities from the rest of the greater community. And so, the salve for isolation is connection. Thank you for being here.
A community that works together is safer and is a better community. We cannot, keep working in silos like we're doing. Let's not make perfection the enemy of progress. Changing system is a lifetime goal. Ending racism, ending discrimination in all these forms. We might not even live to see the end of it, but we each have a voice, and we each have a group of people around us. So interrupt words of racism and stupid racist jokes when you hear them. You do not need to confront people, and I agree, we cannot interact every time, as the defenders, but interrupt. Don't let people diminish other people in front of you or tell stupid racial jokes or slurs or everything. Say, no, that's not acceptable, and just, that's it, just don't listen to it. We're safer and we're much better when we can just breathe free and be who we are as just regular human beings. And thank you for being here and for listening and for paying attention, really. But we need more, so influence your sphere and your groups. You know, we can only do one person at a time, but let's get going.
So I have two thoughts here on kind of closing out. One is, I know we've talked a lot about hate crimes and hate incidents here today, but I want to talk about just briefly, one other aspect of the work that I do. So as you know, I work in the Attorney General's office, and some of what I had heard in the small group discussions and in some of the conversations around how state agencies and other kind of institutional engagement with diverse communities in the state. Particularly where we're dealing with, if your concern is around an interaction you've had with a state agency or staff at a state agency, I work down the hall from, every state agency has an attorney in our office. I work down the hall from all of them. If there are concerns about how a state agency might be doing something that perpetuates discrimination or is harmful, you can let me know and I can talk with those attorneys. I can get those conversations started, because it may be that, it may be an isolated incident, but it also may be something that requires looking at policies and practices and procedures that needs to be fixed so we don't, engage in discrimination. I'm a firm believer in, if we're saying here other people shouldn't discriminate, the state shouldn't be discriminating against people either. So we want to make sure that, we are doing everything we can to help people, even if it is short of being able to take legal action. But then turning back to kind of what we came here to talk about, and I had mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, I think it's always important to remember that, when we're confronting hate in the world, the purpose of it is to, I always use the phrase, it's encouraging people to diminish themselves, to dim the light that they bring into the world. And the answer to that is always going to be shine brighter. It is don't let people tell you to be less than who you are. Let people tell you to hide who you are. Shine bright and be proud of who you are and what you bring to the world, because it is valuable, it is important, and as you can see around this room and in your communities, the vast majority of people are going to be there to support you and lift you up. It is the minority that are there, and often they hide themselves because they don't want to necessarily suffer the consequences for their actions that take those opportunities to tear people down.
I guess the way I look at it is we have a responsibility to report, and no incident of hate should go unreported. And give us a better picture of what is happening in our society. And then just leave it to the courts and the attorneys to deal with that collision between the First Amendment or not, whether it does apply, whether it's freedom of speech, but it needs to be reported. That way they have a clearer picture of what folks in this state and this community are seeing, hearing, and dealing with. And just let them make that decision, whether is it or is it not protected. If it's not protected, what can we do to deal with that matter? And does it rise to a hate crime or an offense that the Attorney General's office or whoever might that be pursue a civil suit against the person? But if they don't have the information, they can't do the work.
So, mirroring what everyone else said, thank you all so very much for participating. We had no idea how many people would come on a Thursday morning, and I will say on behalf of the Planning and Steering Committee, we're very excited that you all chose to come, and we really do appreciate that. So I'll do my moderator. Thank you so much. I also appreciate that you laughed at my jokes. That makes me feel really, really good. And just have a great rest of your day, and I'm turning it back over to A.C. Edwards.
Wonderful panel. Thank you so much for sharing that. Before we bring up Dr. Dolly Morris to give us a positive goodbye message here, I just want to take a one moment.
Tom.
It's
Tom.
going to be Tom.
Tom.
It could be both. We could do both.
Oh, okay. All right. I was corrected.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's we just take one moment and have the law enforcement officers here. I just want to make sure you know who they are. They get to say their name, where they're from, in the community. So we're starting out over here. Lieutenant.
Lieutenant Vincent Grieco from Troop C, right here in Keenan, I'm the commander of the troop. Police Chief here in Keene.
Josh English, I'm the school resource officer at our high school.
Okay. Tom, we go together? All right.
We'll do a choral.
Yeah. All right. Let's get you both up here.
Yeah.
A couple things that I want us to remember is it's not a us and a them. It's a both, it's all of us. So we've talked a lot about people who are harmed, and some of us need to stand in solidarity with those people who are harmed, but realize when you're standing in solidarity, you're really standing for yourself as well. I think about, I'm a psychologist by training, and I think about when Robert Coles went down to Louisiana to study Ruby Bridges. She integrated the public schools in New Orleans. And when she would walk into schools, people would be yelling such hateful things to this 6-year-old girl. I mean, just horrible things. And so one day, Dr. Coles, who's a psychiatrist, asked Ruby a question. What do you do as you're walking in and these people are yelling these horrible things to you? And she said to him, I pray. Now he thought she was saying, I'm praying for myself. But what she said, I pray for them because they have that much anger and rage. There must be something wrong in their lives. So I think that this whole idea that we were raising today around trying to understand ourselves through our advocacy, and we're not just doing it for the other person, I'm doing it for me. So I usually try to challenge certain people when I'm in these moments. One was a woman, a teacher of mine, Mrs. Brenda Backrack, who just died a couple years ago. My father, who taught me, even when the crosses were burning in my neighborhood, on fences, not to hate all white people, because he gave me examples of white people who were not like those people. So I never saw white people as a generic group because of that critical lesson my father taught me when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, and I'd watch those crosses burn. And I remember one day I said, I hate white people. He said, never let me hear that come out of your mouth again. And then he explained to me. And not only that, but he lived it. And the third person is a woman by the name of Rupert Clemens, who was in my church, who was the only woman of African descent. When she died, she laid in state at the Capitol because of the work that she had done to heal some of the wounds around racial violence and inequity. And so whenever I'm here, I try to channel what would they do? What would my dad do? What would Mrs. Clemens do? What would Mrs. Backrack do in these settings? And that's all that I want to leave with you is that. But I also feel like another thing is that you have to know where you're going to come up with a plan to get there. So can you just trust me for just a few minutes? Okay? I'm a psychologist. You don't have to close your eyes, but if you like, just close your eyes for a minute. Just take a few breaths. In and out. And what I want you to do is think about a world where violence isn't the rule of the day, where hatred doesn't exist, where arms are always extended to someone who is different and a desire to want to know about who these people are because they are part of me. A world where there are no such thing as a civil rights violation, or even a need for rules around how we treat each other as part of an extension of ourselves. encourage pro-social behavior, the behavior that we want, rather than constantly fighting against the behavior that we don't want? How do we embrace ourselves in a way that we don't have to compare ourselves to anyone else, to feel greater than someone else, that we could feel the connection of our overlapping humanity? Now take it another step. What are you willing to do to create that reality? How do you plan to take some of the things that you've heard today to create that reality that you thought about, that you're dreaming about right now, that you're focusing on? How do you use your energy to direct that? How do you enter in a world of awe, that all you have is love and compassion for others? Think about that. How do you go to them? How do you do what Representative Lewis reminded us? How do you use the love force to combat that? And how do you not become the very thing that you despise? And that's people who are hateful and engage in hateful acts. In your process of confronting hate, but instead having that dream that you're considering. Just stay in that moment for a while. Believe that it's possible. Because I believe in a couple of things. I believe that people can redeem themselves. I believe in redemption. I would be a psychologist, and I believe in redemption. Just keep that in mind. As I look at people who are uniformed and say, they're not the police and the community, they are the community. They are our friend. And we have to realize we have more to lose if we don't recognize that image that you have in your head from the things that I asked you to imagine. We have more to lose, and we have a lot to gain by doing it. And this is not Pollyanna. I believe that we have to believe in ourselves more than what we're doing, because we're bad.
Donnie, thank you so much for bringing the heart and soul. And you know what, Donnie, I don't think I have ever had a day where I was so proud of our state and local officials than today. Could you all give everybody one more applause for all of our state and local officials who brought us here today? I hope you'll give me some grace, because I came with some prepared remarks and I've scribbled all over them. And some part of what I'm going to say amplifies things that some people have already said. My name is Tom Julius. I chair the Monadnock Interfaith Project. Monadnock, acknowledging that we are a connected region residing on ancestral land of the Abenaki people, land that was colonized, not freely given. And place names like Monadnock and Ashwelot remind us the descendants of the first people are still among us. And interfaith, because we're a coalition of active clergy and lay people from over 15 local congregations, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Muslim, Baha'i, and individuals who identify as wholehearted people who identify as spiritual but not with any particular religious tradition. And project, because our mission is to foster community understanding and systems change, and that will always be a work in progress. So the Monadnock Interfaith Project, MIP, I'd be happy to talk with any of you more about that later. Because really what I want to emphasize that we all heard today, after so much important practical strategies for addressing hate crimes, and Dottie showed us the way as to how we find hope when so many people tell us that we're divided. And what does our faith bring to this conversation? And I'm not talking about faith. Faith does not have to be about what I want you to be like, or what I want you to believe. Faith and hope are what make us human. This is what Dottie helped us connect with in our panel, too. Faith and hope enable us to live with uncertainty. The truth is that all faiths and all wholehearted people draw from a deep common well, and that is treat and care for others the way they and we ourselves want to be treated and cared for. The golden rule is that bridge. We heard this word bridge several times today. It's that bridge that all people, that people in all faith traditions have built over centuries of sacred wisdom. It's the bridge where we meet from across our differences, where we neutralize hate, and where we make more good things happen. Sean called hate crimes message crimes. We can preempt that message with our own community message of light and love and hope. And I was really glad that one of the questions brought out some of the names of the organizations in this region that are bringing that light and love and hope. So the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, the Keene Human Rights Committee, and the Monadnock Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee. See, I got the whole thing. The International Festival, Eli mentioned, the Monadnock Center for Violence Prevention, Keene Housing, the Pride Fest, 100 Nights, Restorative Justice in Cheshire County, the Keene Police and the County Sheriff's Office, and all of our first responders, Southwest Community Services, the Community Kitchen, Project Home, Monadnock Peer Support, and there are so many others. These are the bridges of connection in our community that neutralize hate. They are already here. And we heard several stories today that illustrate how civic bridge builders meet to make more good things happen and bring hope into dark spaces. So for instance, in 2020, when George Floyd's murder brought into stark focus our cultural inequities, law enforcement showed up in public spaces to express their sorrow and take proactive steps to examine their own practices. The Racial Justice and Community Safety Committee was formed. In 2023, when there was hateful graffiti in the local schools and defacing of a local church, faith leaders collaborated with school administrators, spoke out in public media, and gathered in solidarity to demonstrate that this behavior will not pass. After October 7th Hamas attack on Israelis and the subsequent retaliation in Gaza, a local rally was planned on Keene Central Square in support of Palestinian human rights. But the rally organizers were acquainted with Rabbi Dan, and because of their affiliation through the Interfaith Project, they contacted Dan to reassure him that the rally would be in support of peace and not be anti-Semitic. this June 19th, the Keene Swamp Bats baseball team will hold their first Juneteenth night, commemorating the oldest celebration that marks the end of slavery in the U.S. We've heard a lot about how powerful expressions of solidarity and collective action make a difference. These bridges to solidarity and collective action do not arise spontaneously. They come from a community united in the belief that treating and caring for one another the way they and we ourselves want to be treated and cared for leads to making more good things happen. And we hear this over and over again. Recently we had Roman Catholic Father Greg Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries, that serves gang members released from incarceration. He visited Keene on Martin Luther King Day, and his work led him to realize there is no us and them. There is only us. Dr. Len Fleischer, the Jewish son of Holocaust survivors, made a presentation last week recalling his experience witnessing in empathy with other adult children of victims and perpetrators at the Auschwitz concentration camp. He found the bridge to the future is one another. And guest speaker Luong Un, the survivor of the devastating Cambodian genocide, gave a talk at the Cohen Center, and she told us 300,000 years of Homo sapiens evolution does not end here. There is no us and them, there is only us. The bridge to the future is one another. 300,000 years of Homo sapiens evolution does not end here. That faith and hope are what make us human and give us the courage to face hate. These are the bridges that bring light, love, and life-affirming power into our community. We will keep meeting on these bridges and building a more beautiful future together. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom and Dottie. Well, listen, this has been fantastic. Fantastic, a lot of good information, a lot of good energy. And I just want to kind of wrap up, just let you know, this is our second one, as you know. The next one will most likely be on the seacoast, and then we're going north. And after that, we're going to do another statewide event. But this is not a one and done type of situation. This message has to be repeated over and over and over again. And so again, I just want to thank all of you for your participation today and your connections with other folks here today. And keep up the good work and have a wonderful day. Thank you.